Hello and welcome to the Business and Property Podcast. I'm Stuart.
And I'm Simon.
We're both property people running our own business. This podcast is just us chatting, as we often do, about anything and everything property. And Simon, we were just having a little chat, just a very quick pre-chat about what we can do during this lockdown as opposed to the things that we can't, specifically related to our property businesses. So I'll open up to you first then. So what can we do? What are you doing at the moment?
Well, there are some things that I thought of that might be applicable to people more widely. But since you've asked what am I doing, I'm catching up on my paperwork. So I spend normally half an hour or so a month scanning documents, recording the details in Patmo, which I use to track my property finances.
Of course.
When rent is paid and the bills I have coming out and things like that, and that keeps things ticking over. Generally speaking, each month as things go on, but then at the end of the tax year, you need to go back and double check and make sure these tie up with bank statements and fill in the little bits and pieces that you've inevitably missed or that need adjusting here or there. So I've been catching up a bit on that and starting to get ready for my tax return. I haven't actually started filling it in yet, but the property bits of it are pretty much there. Patmo, once you've put the figures into Patmo, it's just a few clicks to give you the figures ready for your tax return. So they're pretty much there and ready. I've still got to sort out other elements that I have to put into my tax returns. Obviously, my business income and things like that as well. And I haven't got those sorted out yet, but I think they're things I probably should get going soon. From our little pre-chat, I'm getting the feeling you're probably not quite taking that approach with your tax return figures.
Well, I just want to say, if anyone else is feeling inadequate about having not approached your tax returns, don't worry, you're on the same bus as me. So, to be honest with you, I just follow the instructions of my accountant. When my accountant says he needs something, or the bookkeeper says they need something, that's usually my indicator to actually get my backside in gear and do something. So no, I haven't been thinking about HMRC.
Does your accountant do your self-assessment for you as well as your business accounts?
Yeah, so they pretty much do everything. I mean, it is pretty straightforward. You're right. And I just said I haven't thought about HMRC, but as we were talking previously, the one thing that has been, again, we're talking about things you can do, but the one thing I did as well is because I've got quite a few corporation tax payments, and I had some VAT payments that were coming out monthly in the account, and not certainly significant numbers, and it cancelled those, phoned the HMRC, and they were actually absolutely outstanding. Really, just said, yeah. This will all be paused until the end of June and be revised again at the end of June. So, as I said to you, you won't hear me say it often, but I had a very pleasant experience on that call with the HMRC, and that was just down to me. One of the things we can do was looking at my current cash flow and looking at that on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think some of the government measures have been specifically to pause a lot of the payments that would be needed to HMRC. I think there's different approaches and processes for these things, but certainly VAT you can pause. And I think some PAYE-based taxes you can also apply to delay as well. I think the part of the idea of that is to help companies who are struggling with furloughing staff and making payroll while they're waiting for other funds to come through from the government, other support. But you say corporation tax they did as well. I don't think I'd heard that one specifically mentioned before.
Yeah, I don't think it's been mentioned overtly, but so I spoke with someone about the VAT and then with someone about the corporation tax, and yeah, he just said, yeah, I can manage that for you as well, and we're happy to put that on pause. I think, in that example, they are doing what they can, and that obviously it's very helpful to us. And talking about doing what we can, just bringing it back to what our sort of topic is today. That was something, a couple of things you mentioned, which I think are really pertinent, because I was looking, at my daily cash flow, thinking about certifications and that kind of thing on the properties that I've got. But you also talked about interest rates. So when we say documentation or administration, I know most of us want to just shut our eyes and hit our head against the desk. But I think you talked about reviewing interest rates, which I think is a really good one too.
Yeah, indeed. I'm always surprised by hearing people who have let mortgages slip onto standard variable rates, which obviously generally a lot higher than you can get from a fixed rate at the moment. So if that's the case, or if you're not sure, then I think it's an excellent time to go through the mortgages you've got, check the situation that they're currently in, and where you can look at making changes to those, and certainly getting off any standard variable rates, probably onto fixed rates, assuming your longer term or medium term plans fit with a commitment for a fixed rate.
Yeah,
but I think you've mentioned or experienced that it can be hard for some, or hard to progress mortgages with some lenders at the moment. But changing from a standard variable onto a fixed with the same mortgage provider, we would, in our non-expert opinions, expect to be still available, wouldn't we? So they haven't got so much work to do there.
Yeah, it's usually a tick box exercise. I mean, quite literally a tick box exercise. And even the bank that I work with that are Dickensian in the extreme in terms of their paperwork, even when it comes to getting off the SVR onto another mortgage, they drive you online just to literally tick a box and digitally sign it. So and like you, I was really surprised, and I'm sure I saw a stat only the other day, and I'm going to butcher it, so as always this number is just out of my head, but it's something ridiculous, like around a fifth of people just leave the mortgages on the standard variable rate. And I've witnessed, even with a further borrowing. So one of my further borrowings, just that the monthly payment is £77, but that slipped 1 month. It slipped onto the SVR because I hadn't got my paperwork in order, and the next month that went up to £120. So,
ouch.
Yeah, I mean, so that's almost double. And if you think about that, even if your standard, if your mortgage rate was whatever, 3%, if that jumps up to a standard rate of 5%, that's a lot of money, And for me, that just that little further borrowing cost, £50 a month, that's £600 a year. So, that's that could cover some refurbishment or whatever else, So again, thinking about that on a bigger mortgage, it's a big deal.
It is. It's that jump from fixed rate, which might be around 2%, maybe. If you're looking at a smaller portfolio with in a personal name, up to a standard variable rate of maybe 5-ish%, maybe even a bit more. I mean, that's a big jump. So it's definitely worth staying on top of these things and setting up reminders so you know exactly when your fixed rate is going to end, so you don't miss talking to a broker and getting that sorted out in advance.
If only there was a platform, Simon, where you could put these things in and it would remind you.
Indeed. If only. I struggle to think of one, but yeah. so yeah, this is something that Patmo will, of course, help with. But if people don't want to use a sort of specific property management tool, even just something in a Google Diary or calendar or whatever, it's probably enough for just one or two properties. But yeah, if in fact, although having said that, I should say, if you've only got one property that you're using for buy to let, then you can actually set that up for free in Patmo and set up the mortgage expiry reminders, and that's available for free. So no excuse for people not to do it.
No, and I was just going to follow up finally on this point. I think we've made the point, but your point from 2% to 5%. The problem is, I think when you see that number of from 2 to 5, it doesn't feel like a big number at all. But percentage points. If you've got £100,000 borrowing, that's obviously £2,000 to £5,000. So that's £3,000, and then for a lot of us, obviously, it's going to be much higher than that. So it's fairly significant. And like you said, I mean, right now I'm using this time actually going through all of my mortgages and putting down what the current rates are and the expiry dates, and then just setting reminders for those expiry dates, because it does have such a big impact on margin. And I've experienced more than anything recently just the the differences that just pounds can make into the business.
Yeah, just on that percentage point. Oh dear, that's not what I meant to do. But a percentage point, you think 1%. Oh, that's small. But actually, as soon as you start talking about slightly bigger numbers, 1% is quite big. So I mean, 1% of £100,000 is £1,000, and £1,000 is not insignificant. And of course, when you start talking about even bigger numbers, it multiplies up quickly. So I think percentages can often be sort of quite misleading because they only deal with sort of the number on a base of 100. They feel smaller than they often are when you're dealing with property size numbers.
Yeah. So don't become one of the zombie mortgage holders where we've just let it slip into SVR and carry on without knowing. It's it's a dangerous game to play. I think on that point of setting reminders, just the other thing that I've been looking at as well is for most of my properties, the agents are arranging all of the documentation, which I don't always get sight of, but I'm now requesting that documentation. So the gas safety certificates, the PAT testing, the electrical safety,
EICRs, I think, aren't they? The electrical safety certificates.
Yeah, fire risk assessments, FRAs, all of that stuff being done. So for me, that's what I'm doing now, is trying to get a greater handle on the business in terms of, your point around documentation. And then the final thing that not the final thing, but, one of the other things that I'm looking at as well is just reviewing. So I actually did a couple of videos of properties before the lockdown and almost just reviewing them and looking at works that I can do just to upgrade them and develop them. So that's kind of what I've been busying myself with.
I think you mentioned you're generally looking at being a bit more proactive in the management of your properties at the moment, and that's something you're sort of working towards in this time.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you want to say a bit more about that, or perhaps the reasons behind it, or the?
Yeah, I'm happy to be open about it.
With it.
Yeah, that's why I'll enjoy these chats, because it just gets us a chance to think and reflect. But what I've realised is that in my business, the revenue hasn't been as good as it could be. It's been okay. I mean, we're talking, it's 6-figure revenue because we've got a number of rooms. However, the costs coming out of the business have been too high, both maintenance, utility bills, and so on. Now, I've sort of put the pressure on where the pressure needs to be put in terms of the agents. I have multiple agents to improve that. But one thing's become quite clear: no one's going to look after the business as each of us looks after our own businesses, because we know. And so, my approach now, as I just mentioned, is getting the documentation, making sure that's been done, and also reviewing line by line. So something I did, which was a really laborious task, and something that took me a whole day, was I went through every statement that I've had in the last 2 years and recorded gas and electricity, which doesn't sound like a big task, but for my portfolio it is, because we get the utility bills on a monthly basis by property, but they're not labelled by property. So I have to go through, check the whatever it is, the site number, and log that. And it took me from basically 8 a.m. till 6 o'clock at night, but to log all of the utility bills in the last 2 years, to track them, and then think about, okay, what can I do differently? So yeah, I'm looking at greater management and maybe less outsourcing of what I do. And with one of the properties, maybe taking on a bit more management. As you know, that's not a walk in the park, particularly as my properties are over 220 miles away. So it's thinking about how I approach that. But it's, what I love about this time for me, obviously from a business standpoint, from a humanity perspective, but for me, it's really given me a chance to reflect and think about, okay, what do we really need to do to improve this business? And the other thing, given for me that the cash flow is now dropping, it's making me be more creative in the sense that, okay, where can we reduce cost? I think one thing I've now learned is that, when the revenue's coming in and everything looks rosy, it can cover a multitude of sins, and maybe expenses are higher than they should have been had I not had my back against the wall as it is now. So for me, hopefully, I'm pretty optimistic about it, but it's causing me to be hopefully a better businessman.
Have you already identified sort of good savings, or are you still in progress? And will this be something we come back to in the future to hear
It's still in
hear the
progress.
results?
Yeah, I've looked at who we're with in terms of the utility provider. It looks like we're with a very good utility provider. It's the same utility provider across around 32 rooms. But what I've seen is that on the bills I get, for example, there are standing charges in there, but I've gone onto their website online and it says, for multi-property providers, we don't charge standing charges. Now, it may be that that's the agreement they've got with the letting agent, but it's very similar to what we're talking about with the mortgages. It's the same in our personal lives. Once we get gas and electric, very rarely do we think about changing it, just because it's a ball ache. And it's the same in property, isn't it? So I think we need to keep other businesses on their toes by looking at these things. Although there are businesses like Look After My Bills from a residential perspective, and I've forgotten what the commercial version of that is, but there is a commercial version which I've looked at, but they seem to have gone missing at the moment.
Oh, but if we can find them later, we'll put them in the show notes.
Yeah, I think it's called The Big Deal. I think they're called The Big Deal.
Okay.
Which is the sister company of Look After My Bills, but essentially they will always look at usage and payment and change it. So, for me, that's...
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that's the important bit, is making sure that we're, again, being proactive and not just letting these things slip away.
Yeah, I think people like Look After My Bills and things, I think there's a couple of others in the same sort of niche. I think it's a brilliant idea because they take away that hassle of remembering to do that, and they'll stay on top of the best deals available. Although the ones, and I don't know if this applies to Look After My Bills specifically or not, I can't remember who it was I looked into, but there was one in particular I looked into, and they said in the very, very small print that we will find you the best deal among our available suppliers, of which we have 3. So it's not exactly sort of whole of market appraisal for finding you really the best deal available. It's actually just the best deal among the suppliers that they've managed to sort out their own deals with, and maybe they do work out to be the best deals available for individuals.
But I think that exemplifies the point, Simon, which is, we have, even if we've got those companies, the responsibility is always ours. So the point you're making is one that I would wholeheartedly agree with, which is, even if you've gone with that company, it's still incumbent on us to make sure that we are getting the best value.
Yeah, quite. I don't know. I don't quite know how the sort of contract you have with them works. Whether they sort of sit as an intermediary for the actual utility supplies, or whether they act as a manager and you still have a direct relationship with whoever your supplier is. So I'm just thinking how you would sort of get out of that arrangement if you wanted to. So if you carry on looking into this, I'll be interested to hear the results.
Yeah, well, I am, so you will. But I think in terms of the regulation for utilities and service providers in that scape, it's very hard for them now just to, unless you've signed a contract for 12 months, obviously you're then engaged to be with them legally. But I think generally you have pretty much, the ability to move where you wish. But I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, the energy markets these days are forcibly more flexible than they used to be, which can only be a good thing. Although, like we said, that several energy companies have been going bust in the last few years. Although even when that happens, there are, generally speaking, good processes for transferring those customers onto another supplier and keeping everything ticking over and things. So nobody gets cut off, at least.
Yeah.
Even if you might end up with a slightly different deal.
I think what we're saying overall as well, just in terms of these down times in inverted commas, because I know, we're not downing tools. We're at home with the kids, or you're at home and you still work to do and other things to look after. But is about sort of reviewing where we're at, and for me, yes, utilities, energy providers. If we're with letting agents, what are the rates? I mean, I've got a letting agent down, in terms of negotiating. To be honest, it was a very high rate, but we've negotiated that down. And I'm not suggesting we do that right now, because you actually need to support each other and get through this time. But is your rate the most competitive it can be in the market? You might be happy with it, but again, it's worth looking at, because even if you negotiate 2% down, that's 2% margin back in your favor. Again, from that makes a big difference. Just the other thing I'll sort of mention as my final point on this particular podcast, Simon, was one thing I did, which might sound blindingly obvious and to everyone else, but I looked at my room rates, and most of my room rates are kind of in the ballpark which I set them. And like a lot of people with sort of properties, I guess, it gets to a certain stage where you just want to get people in the rooms. So if you've got a 5-bed house, and sometimes you've gone, let's just get the group of 3 or the group of 4 that want to take it. I just looked at the cost impact of that on the business, and it was so significant. And I know this is a no-brainer. So just knowing, usually the profit comes from the final room in the house, but also to get people in, dropping the room rate by 10, 15, 20 quid, actually timesing that by 3 and then timesing it by a year. I was like, hold on, that's just cost, I'm not giving you the exact figures here, but it was circa 10, 15k.
Multiplication is a powerful thing, isn't it?
So yeah, just doing the maths. So it's like, okay, so actually, my problem, the problems in the business, are, well, threefold. It's obviously around, can we drive costs down? Have we got revenue in terms of the occupation levels? But also, are the room rates what we've projected them to be? And if they're not, that's impacting the business. So I think a lot of these things, while we've got a bit of downtime, are quite, well, certainly for me, have been really, really eye-opening.
Yeah, it's a good chance to take the time to review everything, basically. And yeah, on your mathematical revelations, I think it is often missed. I mean, it's similar to the sort of percentage discussion, but multiplication, as soon as you get 2 or 3 multiplications in a calculation, it makes a big difference. I mean, it's like compound interest. Nobody really, well, I'm sure some people do, but most people don't really sort of comprehend compound interest in their head. But then when you do the maths, do the sums, it's so powerful, and it's all just the multiplication on multiplication just makes numbers really big really quickly, and it's so easily missed, so easily missed.
Indeed, and yeah, it's one of those things. I think when you get so tied up in business, we forget. Well, certainly, in my case, in my experience anyway, I forget to just look at these basic principles.
We had a big list of other things I thought might be good to talk about today that were a bit less property related, but we've run out of time, so we're going to have to save those for another time. Perhaps if anybody listening to this podcast would like us to chat about anything in particular, perhaps they could get in touch. If you look at thebusinessofproperty.com, there's a contact form there. And Stuart and I look forward to talking to you next time.
See you next time.